All right, so we're back with another episode of Dave's R&R Rambles and Reviews with your host here, Dave. And today we are going over You Season 4, Part 1. Netflix just dropped a few days ago the first 5 episodes of Season 4. They're splitting it down the middle with the next 5 episodes coming out in March. So we had these first 5 episodes, and it's a completely new ball game this season. There are spoilers ahead and predictions for part 2, so listen ahead with kind of some caution if you don't want to know what really happened. Save the review for a later time and come back to it, because we're going to be deep diving into this part 1 and giving thoughts for part 2 ahead. So let's jump right into it. The premise of this season is just a little different than the past seasons. Still the same old Joe in a way, just a little different here. Joe is now in London. A lot different from the States. He was originally chasing his latest love interest from season 3, Marion, but as we see in the first couple episodes, that absolutely failed him, so now he's under a new identity, Jonathan Moore, and right away, old Joe comes out. He has a new obsession in the form of his neighbor, Kate, in London. He's starting to slowly get obsessed over her. Joe, of course, at first, like always, says, "Oh, it's not going to happen again. It's not going to happen again." It ends up happening. He's obsessed with Kate. However, the big twist on this season is right away he went to a party with Kate and her boyfriend, Malcolm. It's one of those exclusive clubs. Joe is now involved with a bunch of rich people, like usual, people he's not really fans of. He wakes up after a night of partying and Malcolm is dead. And we're starting to see text messages show up on Joe's phone that disappear right away, saying that someone's watching after Joe and is on to him and knows what's going on here and is threatening Joe, or I should say now Jonathan, with all these different things. And it's led to a whole new thing, because instead of Joe being the stalker this season, it ends up that he's the one being stalked. So throughout the episodes, he's trying to figure out in the group who is the one stalking him, because he's sure that it's someone in this rich friend group that he's now been involved with since the party. And he does have a few suspects going on. There are a couple more deaths in the season after Malcolm, like Simon. And Joe, every time there is a death, it seems like he's either blacked out or asleep. So it definitely leads to some theories I'm going to talk about later in the episode. But the deaths keep coming, and everyone's just wondering who's doing it at this point. And later on in the season, it all leads to them all staying at this private house. There's no cell phone service, no Wi-Fi, and they're all kind of stuck there, and they're trying to get away from society with all these murders going on. And episode 5, after being at this house, concludes with Joe coming face to face with who is now the one causing these murders. It's the author of a book he's been reading, Reese, and Reese kind of appears from time to time in the friend group. Joe kind of relates to him based off a book he was given by a student. They kind of had similar upbringings. The only difference is Reese ended up having a father who was able to get him into prestigious colleges, and now he's running for mayor of London. So part 2 is going to lead into Joe versus Reese. So let's kind of break this all down. This new cast, it's kind of the same old, just in London now. You have a bunch of rich people. Joe always says how much he hates this group of people, but he always ends up being involved in them. I do think they had some fun casting choices here with the different actors and actresses they had playing the friends here. We knew going into the season, watching the trailers, that with the show being in London now, that it was just going to be a completely new cast. So I think they did a great job across the board, from Kate to Malcolm to Lady Phoebe to Adam. All these different characters that they have added a lot to the show at this point. And it's kind of taken the focus off Joe as much, because now we're trying to figure out who was the killer this whole time. So I did like that about the first 5 episodes. It is different from seasons past, and I think they really needed to do that this time around. Having Joe be the center of the attention, stalking some other girl, we've seen it a couple times now. It's nothing new. So I liked how they kind of flipped it to who's stalking Joe at this point. And that kind of leads into some predictions I'm going to have for the second part of the season. I think they had a solid cast. They had a solid premise. The execution wasn't as great as I wanted it to be. I just feel like they could have done a lot more with it. And maybe it is because the season was broken down into 2 different parts. I think they have to have some building blocks here, so they started building towards that second part. But overall, I thought these first 5 episodes could have been a little stronger for what we've seen in the past from the show. A couple points that stuck out to me, kind of like a wink wink spot, was when Joe was handling one of the murders. Cardi B music was playing in the background. I felt like this was a fun moment because of Joe and Cardi B's interaction on Twitter before, so I definitely feel like that was their little wink wink nudge nudge there. I did like the partying scene since we usually don't see Joe on the party end of things here. And probably my favorite scene so far in the first 5 episodes, I wish they would have extended it out, was Joe being hunted. I feel like that always works well in horror and thriller movies, so I really liked how they did that. I just felt like parts of this first 5 episodes were kind of blah, though. It kind of didn't grab my attention as much as I thought it would, especially how strong of a show You has been for the first 3 seasons. I was really hoping it would come out a little stronger. It's a solid premise they have, but it was kind of on the weaker end. I hope it builds into a strong part 2. Because I do think if part 2 is very strong, in hindsight, this first 5 episodes is going to look a lot better. But for right now, my official rating for You Season 4 Part 1 is a 6.75 out of 10. I don't think it was weak enough to be in like the lower echelon, but I can't justify giving it a 7. If Part 2 turns out great, it could change my overall perspective of the season, but these 5 episodes, in a nutshell, I give a 6.75 out of 10. And that leads into some predictions I have for part 2, some things I'm hoping to see. I think there's a couple big theories going on right now. And one of the biggest ones that I kind of been thinking about since binging the 5 episodes is if Reese, this writer, is even in these scenes and it's just Joe making up things in his head. We've seen in some iconic horror and thriller movies in the past that the main protagonist has been seeing all these different murders happening and trying to figure out the mystery, but it's actually just delusion in their head, split personality, you can say, and they've been doing it themselves this whole time. I think this can go with the fact that Joe hasn't been the most reliable narrator throughout the show. He kind of twists and turns things his way to see his perspective. So in his head, he can be imagining all these scenes with Reese, because Reese doesn't really interact with the other cast, and that's something that's been noticed as well. It only seems like he's been talking to Joe, and he kind of appears out of nowhere. And it's just too suspicious to me over and over again that, Joe, the first episode, blacked out at the party, fell asleep when Simon got murdered. It's just too much of a coincidence for Joe not to be a murderer since he's been right there. And we did hear from one of the new students, Nadia, that murder mysteries, there are no coincidences. So I think they're going to lean heavy into Joe being the killer in the end game. I'm hoping they don't go that route because I feel like that's kind of predictable. And if Reese really is a character that's actually there and just not a figment of Joe's imagination, I would love for that kind of battle to go on in season 2. Part 2, now that Joe knows that he's the quote-unquote murderer, I'd love to see how they bounce off each other going forward. And I do think they're trying to play with our hearts a little bit here. In the preview for part 2, they had a quick shot of Love, Joe's former wife, the mother of his child, and everyone loves Love, and that's not exaggeration. She's one of the best characters in You. She might be the best. I think it would have been kind of cool if at the end of last season, if Love ended up killing Joe, and this season was about her going forward. But as we know, she died, we think at least, in the house fire. So I do think this scene is kind of just trying to keep us interested, but I think in reality it's either going to be a flashback or a scene that Joe is just hallucinating. Because I don't think if she was actually going to be there, they would show that in the preview. That's something they would want to keep completely under wraps. So look for that to be a flashback or a hallucination. And we'll see where part 2 takes us. We only have a couple weeks to wait till we can see it. I'm excited for it. I know I gave it a 6.75 out of 10, but let's hope they use the building blocks they put in place in part 1 and give us a very strong end into the season, because that can completely change how I feel about the beginning of it. And that's the thing about Netflix doing this part 1 and part 2 thing now. It's going to kind of chop things up a little more. We're so used to binging things now. So let's see how it plays out in March. And that's going to be it for this episode. We've had a lot of different stuff going on this week. The Super Bowl, some more wrestling coming up, a couple of new video games coming out, movies coming out soon. Where Ant-Man's right around the corner, so thanks for tuning in. I'm trying to turn out as much content as possible right now. Follow on the social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Dave's R&R. I've got a wide variety of reviews and stuff going on there. Follow me on Letterboxd and Serialized for other TV episode and movie reviews. And just keep on supporting. I really appreciate it. I hope everybody has a great Super Bowl weekend. And I hope everybody's enjoying all these different shows. Take it easy.